Hello and welcome to Inside the Avatar Studio. Inside the Avatar Studio brings together innovative leaders from the virtual technology frontier to discuss their perceptions, perspectives, and predictions of what being virtual means in today's society. I'm your host, Kevin Feenan, and with me today is Dick Dillon, also known as Coughran Mayo in Second Life. Coughran is a Senior VP of Planning and Development for Preferred Family Health Care, which is a comprehensive behavioral health nonprofit organization established in 1979, I believe. Yeah,
that's correct.
Yeah, and you guys do substance abuse treatment, prevention, mental health services, and mostly in the the mouth is working today, Missouri area.
That's right. Correct? We have offices in 20 cities and towns around Missouri and also in southeastern Kansas, in the Wichita, Kansas area.
Oh wow! Well, it's you got a little, just a little piece of real estate there that you need to look after.
It's a pretty big organization. I just actually flew back today from a trip down to our Joplin, Missouri programs. As a lot of you know, Joplin was hit a couple of months ago by a Force 5 tornado, and it destroyed 2 of the 3 buildings we had. So I was down there today meeting with our community advisory board to talk about our plans for the future and for rebuilding that particular location.
Cool. Well, actually, it's kind of interesting because things along those particular lines, I mean, you look at the situation that, I mean, you just sort of walked into. We look at things such as, the terrorism incident, that occurred in Norway. And, as part of this particular little, thing we do here, every couple of weeks, we talk about, this whole idea of being virtual, right? But yet for nonprofits, and especially the type of work that you guys are doing, where it's very much hands-on and it's very much in everybody's real life, everyday lives, sort of out in the real world, not necessarily in here. Could you maybe describe for us a little bit how you see the role of virtual worlds helping to deal with like the emotional and behavioral implications when, something traumatic occurs, like, the tornado system that sort of hit down there, or what they're dealing with in Norway right at the moment?
Well, I think you can. I can see an immediate value to the virtual world technology being available. As one person put it to me today when they were first driving around Joplin after the tornado. It was about a 2-mile wide, 5-mile long swath of everything was gone. I mean, there was just little tree stumps left and houses that were crumbled in on themselves. And as they were driving around, they realized that the street signs were all gone, and they really had no idea where they were. All the familiar landmarks were missing. And in times like that, just finding your place and being able to get to a spot where you feel safe again and comfortable is nice. And of course, digital technology gives us the ability to both connect with people locally through good tools that we can use, as well as people who aren't in the immediate disaster area, who can help us sort of get our feet under ourselves and find our way back out again. And that's just a really simple example playing off of what I did today. In the bigger picture and in the mental health field, there are populations across the United States, really across the world, that we just have not been able to reach successfully over the years. I've been in this business for about 30 years now, and people living in rural areas or frontier areas are very hard to provide counseling services for, just because of the great gap in distance between where they live and where the services are offered, when the services are tied to physical buildings and geographical space. And so some of the things that we've been doing in the last couple of years utilizing virtual technology has helped us tremendously to reach people and deliver services to people who wouldn't get anything otherwise.
Well, I guess I want to frame a question here. It's just not quite coming out.
You want to talk about it a little?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's nice, excellent. Do I need a couch?
It's okay. You can trust me.
This is what happens when the brain goes faster than the mouth, right? I mean, it's interesting because I mean, there's a whole aspects to, I guess, a lot of the stuff that you guys do, but also with regards to, this whole aspect of nonprofits in general, right? I mean, having this capability to reach out to people who are in those particular rural situations, but then, I mean, do you also not run into the problem that because they're rural, they also don't necessarily have the same access to the type of broadband services that are actually required in order to get, the type of virtual environments that we're dealing with here to get the full effect, right? Not just in terms of the visual, but I mean in terms of the experience.
Sure, we haven't found a perfect solution to everything yet, but what we found is certainly in the States anyway, or in the states in which we operate, that broadband penetration is certainly a growing thing, and there's many more people than we would have expected to have access. They may not have it directly to their house. Some of our clients actually have to go to a local spot, whether it's a coffee house or a library or school, to get an adequate connection. But by hook or by crook, we found really dozens of people that we've been able to help in our pilot projects, who are able to get into Second Life and inhabit a virtual space with other people like themselves, as well as the trained counselors that we use to deliver services. And once you get in and once you get comfortable with the virtual world, as most of us in this room and watching the show know, after a while it feels like you're in the physical presence of another person. And so we've been able to deliver both individual counseling and group counseling services. We do a lot of our work through group activities, and that's a really important thing too, because the virtual world technology, in contrast to other use of technology like telephone counseling or even on camera with a Skype and a camera setup, is a much more realistic setting for a group counseling session. And group therapy through other kinds of technology in rural areas is truly impossible, because you'll have clients who are not only a far distance from the counseling office, but they're a great distance from one another as well. And we found that the virtual world setup really allows us to bring people together in a close personal space and interact with them very effectively.
Right. What about the individual tailoring of the program? I guess where I'm coming from on this is one of, and it may be my own misconception or preconceptions in terms of how I sort of view nonprofits and non-governmental organizations, but a lot of the work that you guys do is a lot of hand-holding in terms of people on the ground, or at least that's the way it seems to me, right? And that while you have the counseling services that might be effectively given inside a virtual space, there's a component of what goes on with inside nonprofits that there's no other alternative but to deliver the service on the ground.
Well, I think that there are certainly things that involve the physical handoff of items to people. For example, if I were working in this will be a relevant comment. If I were working in a cooling center in St. Louis, where the temperature was about 101 today at 4 o'clock this afternoon, and I needed to, I got a shipment of fans from Walmart, and I needed to deliver them to my clients so they could take them home and be physically comfortable tonight. That's not something, obviously, I can replicate in the virtual world. Just like if you and I sit down in the virtual world and I hand you a beer, you can pick up the virtual beer, but you're not going to be able to drink it either. That being said, there's still lots of things that I could do to, for example, have conversation with you and give you tips about how to solve heat-related problems or how to make sure that you're taking care of your health that can be done inside the virtual world and don't really require me to be in the same physical space as you are. So we want to capitalize on the things that we can do and recognize that this is not a universal solution to every activity that every nonprofit in the world engages in. Some things absolutely do have to be done face to face.
Face to face on the ground, yeah. I guess to a large extent, I mean, you're also dealing with a very willing population inside these environments. Maybe not. Maybe that's a bad assumption.
Well, I'll tell you the story of our involvement in virtual counseling, and that was in February of 2007 when I first encountered Second Life, and I came in and I saw on the entry screen before I logged in that there were 14,500 concurrent users. I was just awestruck. And of course, we all know that number's up in the 50s and 60s, sometimes 70,000 now. But it seemed like such a large percentage of people, and I thought to myself, well, this could be a great marketplace for our services. If you just look at the issue of addiction counseling, we know that 5 to 7% of the general population has an addiction problem with alcohol or some other drugs, and looking around this room, it's probably more like 40%. But certainly, as I thought about that 14,000 number, I thought, well, 5% of that's a pretty good chunk of people, 750 people. I wonder if I could just capture them as clients, this would be a great marketing tool. Well, we had the same challenge that a lot of marketers did and still do have in the virtual world, and that is that the population can be large, whether it's 14,000 or 60,000 people, but the population density is not high. So after reflection, and I've said this to many people often, I realized that delivering counseling services to current users of Second Life and marketing those services would be a lot like being a door-to-door salesman in Montana. You have customers there, but the distance you have to drive in between seeing them is prohibitive. So what we did was actually take a couple of steps back and realize that we had clients now that we were encountering for whom various problems, I mentioned the rural issue and that being a big one, but also people with physical handicaps or even people who lived near some of our programs, but perhaps they had to travel through some not so desirable neighborhoods in order to get there and use public transportation and the like. And so we realized we had a lot of clients already who weren't using Second Life or other virtual world technologies, but they could benefit from the ability of being able to connect with each other and with our professional staff inside a virtual world. So we merely got those people and used them as our initial group and taught them how to use the virtual world technology. So we brought the technology to the clients rather than trying to find the clients within the technology. And we found that has been working out very well for us.
Do you find that the ones that come in for I want to say group therapy, which I know is correct, but it just sounds so wrong, that are coming in for those types of counseling services do you find that they're actually staying and becoming part of a community in here, or are they coming in strictly for the counseling services that you guys offer, and then they're sort of like in and gone type of thing?
Well, what we did, because we need to provide a certain level of confidentiality, and there's some rules that we have to follow, some laws that we have to follow about keeping information safe from outside parties, is we actually do our counseling in a private SIM space, so an open SIM type of a project. And so the clients who engage us are coming into a virtual world space that looks a lot like anything you would see or build inside of Second Life, but they're not connected to the main Second Life world. We encourage our clients to utilize Second Life because we believe that the more often they use virtual technology in various parts of their lives, the more immersive the experience becomes when they sit down with us. But we aren't tracking that in any really formal way. Well, people will have conversations from time to time about interactions that they've had inside the virtual world, and or they'll talk about, for example, going to an AA meeting in Second Life, which there are quite a few AA meetings inside Second Life here every week. And so we do know that people are utilizing and staying inside the main Second Life world, but we're not forcing that upon them, nor are we tracking that in particular.
You mentioned that you're using private SIMs in order to do the counseling, the actual counseling portion where there's a question of confidentiality.
Yes.
Not connected to the main Second Life SIM. So do you have your own like open SIM region that you're doing this in, or like it sounds like you've expanded beyond Second Life?
Yeah, we have two open SIM setups on private servers that were set up for us by the Reaction Grid people. We've been working with them for about 3 years, and we have two separate projects. One of them is focused on adolescent clients between the ages of 12 and 18, and the second one is focused on a group that's somewhat older, from 19 to 30-year-olds is the actual age demographic that we're focused on. So we have two private open SIM type regions that we're using, and actually we've got two new projects that we've started within the last 60 days or so, and we're using the Unity game engine and some virtual worlds that are built with that to try that for contrast.
Right. Are you finding that you're running into any legislative problems? Sorry, let me backtrack from that question a little bit. One of the things that we've discovered through some of the work that we've been doing with Duke University and a few other education groups around is that as soon as you start talking about things like patient confidentiality or student records or anything like this, there are some states that have legal requirements in place that basically says you cannot have these conversations over a voice over IP line because it's not secure. Mm-hmm. Right. At least that's the theory, right? So,
correct.
Do you guys run into that particular problem at all with regards to your SIMs? Because obviously you're doing some voice as part of that.
Right. So far, we have not. We've explained how we do things to the people that have funded us, and we have not had anybody challenge us on that. We are paying attention to it, and one of the reasons that we're testing out the Unity tool right now is that it uses a different voice technology than OpenSIM or Second Life does, that promises to be more secure and probably more acceptable to those people that have concerns on that regard.
Yeah, but in general, you haven't really found that it's been that big of a problem.
You know, we have, as I said, we have one project that's been operating for 2.5 years, and the funder is very comfortable with the way that we're doing it. Our second one is about 10 months old, and it's federally funded. And again, we have not had any complications with the U.S. government who's funding us. It's through the Health and Human Services Center for Substance Abuse Treatment, and we're working towards getting our services compensable by the federal Medicaid system, which is where we expect we'll probably run into our first serious challenge to that particular issue. So we're trying to be prepared for that.
So what's the specific issue that's with that particular set of regulations?
Well,
sorry, you don't have to answer that if you don't want to. I mean, it's just.
I'll take the fifth on that one, maybe. No, okay. I think it's just what we've discovered over time, and we do a lot of business in our real life offices our ground-based offices with Medicaid, and they just seem to be extraordinarily fond of regulation. I'll put it that way and sort of leave it at that.
Well,
so if there's
in
some kind of
two,
regulation they can invoke that might complicate the system, somebody there is going to find it, I'm sure.
well, in about 2 weeks, you won't have to worry about it because nobody over there will be paid, so you'll be fine, right?
That's true. Just furlough the inspectors first. That's what we always say.
I know for nonprofits and others that quite often, especially if they're in receipt of federal government funds, and this is, I'm not sure if we've got the same regulation up here in Canada, but I know you've got one in the US that basically says if you're in receipt of federal funding, that you have to provide services in such a way such that anybody in terms of any ability, right, can gain access. So I mean, whether they're sight impairment, hearing impairment, right, what have you, right, and certainly we see groups like Virtual Abilities and others with inside the environment here that cater to that particular need and that particular challenge. But I'm wondering how you have found it with regards to your specific organization.
Well, we're subject to the Americans with Disabilities Act, and just as you said, we have to reasonably accommodate anyone, no matter what their circumstance is, and of course that's not drilled down usually to the extent where it says that every service under every circumstance that you give has to be available to everyone, but that you have to be able to deliver appropriate services to anyone who needs them. So if we find people that are unable to, for example, if we have clients who are don't have broadband access and live in rural areas who can't get into the virtual world in order to get assistance from us, they still have the option to come to one of our offices and get their services in a traditional manner. And so we're not delivering in terms of the content and the methodologies that we're using to deliver counseling, we're not doing anything new and unique when we meet with people in virtual worlds that we wouldn't be doing with them at any one of our traditional locations. So we have the opportunity to offer services to people as best as we possibly can. Once again, you still have challenges that come up with individuals, whether it's a physical handicap or a distance problem or whatever, that you can only do your best to try to solve those problems. And if the resources aren't available for them, then they will have to do without the services, unfortunately. We're still not living in a perfect world yet.
Right. Have you found that there have been very specific challenges that you've had? I mean, you've had a number of projects. Yeah, I mean, some of the information I have here is that you've got close to, a couple of, was it $1.5 million in terms of virtual world type projects?
Yes, we've written grants and won contracts that total up to about $1.5 million now for 4 separate projects, and again, they're different projects. As I mentioned, the first 2 are differentiated by the age group of the clients. The third one is actually a smoking cessation program that we're doing under a grant that we won earlier this year to just really deliver a kind of a canned smoking, quit smoking curriculum. But gathering people together once again in a virtual space rather than having them have to drive to some church basement somewhere where those things are usually delivered. And so we've been able to try this out under various circumstances, and the biggest problems that we have, of course, is the initial getting people used to using the virtual world, which we try to do by having good orientation paths inside of our virtual space where we can meet them and walk them through an orientation trail, so to speak. In the first project we built, since it was focusing on younger people, we actually built a giant hamster habit trail type of thing with the tubes and globes and things, and they find that pretty entertaining. And as they walk through the habit trail maze, every time they stop at one of the nexus points, there's an advisory card that teaches them how to use their camera, or how to use text chat or voice chat or whatever. And by meeting them in the virtual space, we can walk them through those types of things and get over that initial hump. We also offer the opportunity for people, and we'll really promote it if necessary, for them to come in and sit next to us in a real office and do their initial orientation to the virtual space as well, so that they can get past that first learning curve. And that seems to work out pretty well. Other than that, and the usual, your SIM crashed, or my computer crashed today, or I couldn't get a good connection, that's kind of normal to all of us who spend much time in the virtual world. You learn to get past that. You reboot the computer, or we reboot the region, and we move on. One of the interesting things that we've done in our earlier grants is we were able to secure enough funding to actually provide computers to the participants. So we've been buying laptops for people that are adequately set up from the beginning with the appropriate graphics cards and enough power in them to run a good res of the virtual world when they come in world. And we anticipated that could be an expensive undertaking, especially because our initial group was teenagers, and so we built in a 30% loss ratio for the computers. So we figured some would have a 32-ounce soda spilled on them, or be dropped out of a car window, or mysteriously disappear from my school locker or whatever. And as I mentioned, we're 30 months into that project, and so far the number of computers we've had to replace has been 0. Every computer that we've given to somebody is still in service and still being utilized, and they've taken very good care of the equipment, which we're taking maybe undeservedly so as a sign of how much they're valuing the services that they're receiving inside the virtual space.
That's fairly interesting. I hate to say it, but I'm sort of sitting here thinking, wow, it's almost worth having some type of problem that requires counseling to get a computer.
Well, you just come see me anytime, and I'm sure we'll find something.
It's something, I'll be wrong.
I know you well enough to know that we will.
Well, of course, the other question when you're talking about addiction is, how many people have you had to treat after you've brought them in here for video game addiction?
Right at the moment, we're not assessing them for video game addiction. Although there are actually a couple of our early clients who just won't go away. They keep coming back and want to sit in on the group activities and chat with the counselors, and we're saying, we're really done here, and it's time for you to move on, and actually we're developing now some standards to do some peer counselor training for those people, because they have finished the required course of treatment, and they're doing well in their own personal recoveries, and we think they could be good peer counselors for us. And since they want to keep hanging around anyway, we're going to give them a purpose, and so I think that's a really good thing. We have actually not. We don't turn a complete blind eye to this issue, and we're very aware of the fact that. I'm not a big fan of using the word addiction to relate to everything that people do in inappropriate amounts or at inappropriate times. But for simplicity's sake, we're aware that internet addiction is a real thing that people are concerned about, and we just haven't found that to be the case. all of our counseling services are delivered in a communal setting, in the sense that we don't just treat the client in a vacuum, but we stay in contact with family members and friends and other people who might be service providers for them. And so we do pay attention to the comments of other people, and so far we haven't discovered anybody who's somehow fallen into internet addiction because we introduced them to the concept of three-dimensional virtual worlds. And that's not to say it could never happen.
Have you found that there's been a as you've had individuals come through the programs offered here, that family members have come with them into this environment as well?
Yeah, and one of the things that we would like to do in the future is really expand on that sort of a thing, because, again, when we're in the luckiest situation, we've been able to give an adequately functioning computer to a person who has an internet connection that's at least close to home, if not inside their home. We've been able to connect readily with all of our primary clients, the people we're targeting for our addiction treatment. We haven't always found that the parents have the ability to get online and in world as easily, and we don't really have the funds to just dole out computers to everybody who's involved. But we have done some family counseling within the virtual space, and we would like to expand on that in the future, because we think that's a tremendous potential. One area that I am really interested in is delivering counseling services to military personnel, and I think that digital technology, and particularly virtual world-based counseling, is really excellent for that, because there's usually a tremendous distance between the enlisted person and their family members, but there's no reason that they can't all get in-world online at the same time. You just have to synchronize your watches and sit down and have a family session together, despite the fact that they could be thousands of miles away.
Right. There were two things that sort of, as you were talking about family, I guess there was two things that I was sort of wondering about. One is, this idea, how do I put this? Most of the people that we tend to run in here, and maybe it's, the over 40 set, I don't know, but I mean, it's a lot of people we run into here are older. Right. I mean, this is, you don't necessarily have a huge population of 20-somethings running around Second Life. Mm-hmm. But what you just mentioned was that sometimes you have problems with parents of teenagers and I guess people in that early 19 to 30 demographic type area, that the family members are finding it harder to come inside this environment, the people that it is that you're trying to counsel. Have you found that there's any specific reason or aspect for that other than busyness of schedule? Or
I think that the biggest challenge for us, and probably the biggest challenge for a lot of nonprofits who want to utilize Second Life or any other virtual world platform in meaningful ways, is the lack of a lot of extra money laying around to try innovative projects. We've been very fortunate in that we've been able to aggressively seek some funding for some very specific projects, but even that funding is limited to some specific services that we have agreed to deliver, and we weren't always as imaginative in the beginning as we might be going forth from here. And what I think is one of the challenges is that we don't have the money to pay for the staff to work directly with the extended family members in many cases. We don't have the money to pay for hardware or internet connection if that's something that's needed in order for it to happen. But I think that's a general overall challenge for nonprofits in particular. To disabuse people of the notion that not being a nonprofit means you lose money every year. That's not really the case. The situation is that you don't have stockholders that you pay off who make a profit over the operation of your services, but a good, well-functioning nonprofit will have some money left over at the end of the day when they've delivered all the services that they've been contracted to, because we have, as I mentioned, we have 29 buildings. We have computer equipment that needs to be replaced, roofs that need to be repaired, heating systems that need to be fixed. So if you're running effectively as a big nonprofit organization, you're hopefully going to have 5 or 6% of your total revenue left over at the end of the year that doesn't go to the cost of directly delivering services that allow you to do some of those things. But that's not a lot of money, and if you're a small nonprofit, it's a very small sum of money, and so there's not often adequate funding available in order to try new things that haven't been tested and proven in the past. For most nonprofits that I'm aware of, whether they're a counseling agency like ours or some of the many organizations that exist over on Nonprofit Commons, where we're a member, that do a variety of services around the world, most every dollar is spent before you get it. And so I think that's a consistent challenge that nonprofits have to contend with. I certainly recommend that people look for private grants that will allow them to fund their innovative projects, because there is actually quite a bit of money out in the world from private foundations, healthcare-related organizations, and governmental agencies that you can get in the form of grant money, where you might have a little bit more say in determining the parameters of your project, and you can design something that utilizes a virtual world technology that could be accepted and funded.
Right. You mentioned that you were doing work with the Nonprofit Commons Association.
Yeah, we've been involved. Actually, when I first came into Second Life, I went into the search tool, and because I'm sort of a business-like kind of guy, one of the things I looked for was counselors and addiction therapy and things of that nature, and was searching. And then I did search on nonprofits, and found that the TechSoup organization, which is a large San Francisco-based organization that we had actually done business with outside of the virtual world, had a presence here, and they were in the process of setting up what's now the Nonprofit Commons, which is now like a 4 or 5 sim region with about 100 different nonprofits that have spaces there. And so I hunted them down and got involved in nonprofits right from the get-go here.
Right. And as you said, I mean, a lot of them are very small type organizations. From your experience, from talking to a number of these groups and the consulting work and such that you've been doing with them, how have you seen two things? How are they sort of making out, and how have their approach to virtual world sort of changed over the last couple of years since you've been seeing these people progress?
Well, I think it's let me try to take the first question first. How are they making out? Always the smaller you are, the harder it is to kind of dig your toes in, both for the money reason, for the fact that in a smaller organization, it's much more likely that the same person has to wear a dozen hats, and the hat that fits with exploring new technologies to determine how they can be effectively utilized by our nonprofit can be a very small slice of the pie there, to mix a metaphor. And so we have to. We're fortunate again in that we're a large organization, and that my primary job could be easily described as figure out what we need to be doing next year and how to get there and how to pay for it. And so we do have that opportunity that we actually have somebody, myself, on our staff who should be doing what I'm doing, and other people in smaller nonprofits often have to contend with paying the bills and making sure the help shows up on time and get things out the door that I don't have to do, because we have other people in our organizations to do that. There's also that issue of, even if you're effective and you bring a small percentage down to your bottom line at the end of the year to try out new things. If you're a organization with a budget of $1 million, 5% isn't really a whole lot of money. If your budget is $25 or $30 million, it's a chunk of change, and you might actually be able to get some things done. I think the other thing that we've discovered at Nonprofit Commons that does happen a lot is that oftentimes the people that discover that there's a nonprofit-based organization are not always the decision makers at their nonprofit. They're people who came into Second Life for other reasons and just kind of by happenstance learned that there was some organized nonprofit work going on, and they aren't always able to secure the kind of support from the management of their organization that you really need in order to spend the time at first, and if need be, the money that it takes to do anything that has a lot of clout using virtual world technology. So when I meet up with somebody new who's a new nonprofit commons tenant, one of the first things I want to find out from them is, what's your ability to make decisions or to speak to the decision makers in such a way that we can get your nonprofit to be fully behind your participation inside the virtual world. If you don't have that, that can be a real challenge to get much done here.
Yeah, it sounds very much like the same challenge that education is going through. I mean, there's some 600 to 800 educational groups with inside Second Life currently, and more than half of them are single professors that are doing things outside of the academic track.
Yeah, if your administration isn't aware of what you're doing and doesn't support it, you are going to run into challenges sooner or later. Whether it's an expansion challenge or whether it's even getting the permission to use the name of your organization officially in world and be seen as the virtual representative of that organization and inside of Second Life, those challenges are going to arise. So it's really incumbent upon nonprofits, educational organizations to figure out how to work their way up that ladder into the administrative level of their organization and get their work sanctioned. I think you'll have a lot more success if you can get to that point.
Right. What before we go on to the idea of progression, because I do want to come back to that particular question. What were some of the challenges that you went through? I mean, obviously you're at the VP level with inside the healthcare organization there, but I mean, was a lot of the stuff that was happening in here, did it require a real education for the other decision makers with inside?
I remember making a very poor quality video early on, just sort of showing people around the virtual space, and we have a senior management team that includes myself and 7 other people, and the results ranged from rolling of the eyes and what the hell are you talking about to people who were actually actively interested, and even as badly as I was able to portray it to them in the video, started to see the value of it. I think that today, down the road, now that we have several projects going on, we've gotten a lot of really good publicity. In January of this year, we had an article written about us in Popular Science, which I had a copy of that had just come out onto the newsstands at a conference I attended in Baltimore, and I showed it to the audience, and I said, we just got written up in Popular Science, and although I know it's not as prestigious as the Journal of Adolescent Psychiatry, the Journal of Adolescent Psychiatry also doesn't have a circulation of 1.3 million people, so I'm not feeling real bad about that. So it's helped to get good publicity, and it's certainly, when I won our first $300,000 grant, that helped out a lot too. Even the people who still kind of wonder what the heck this virtual world is all about recognize the fact that that other people are willing to give us some money to try what we can do here, and so I think they've become contented with that. It's really not my goal to bring all of our staff into the virtual world, although I'll mention that we've had staff meetings inside of Second Life. We've done job interviews inside of Second Life, interestingly enough, and that's worked out pretty well for us. So I have been able to snag in some of the rank and file middle management and even some of the clinical people and clerical people into virtual world space, and they've usually been able to get it. I think there's a layer of people within our organization, as there probably is within any, who anything, the electric can opener kind of troubles them a little bit. They like those old hand crank ones, and there's a point at which you decide that you don't have to evangelize everyone.
Right. So what, just for the sake of argument, what was the reaction when you went to the first group of line staff people within the organization and basically said, we're going to turn you into our cartoon?
I never said it that way. I've spoken publicly on our projects at several national meetings, and I've kind of honed it down, and I won't say I was able to do this right at the beginning, but one of the things that I do right from the start when I encounter a new audience and I want to introduce this idea to them is that I say, an avatar is a computerized representation of yourself which you control in real time, that allows you to connect with other people inside a virtual space in which they are also represented by avatars. And then I ask everybody in the audience to raise their hand if they've ever had a computerized avatar. And generally, I don't get more than about 10% of the people who will either have done so or are willing to admit it. But then I show them a screenshot from a Pong game. You know what Pong is? And I ask, anybody know what this is? Well, it's like unanimous. Everybody says Pong, And I said, well, if you'll recall, when you played Pong, there was a little blip here, rectangle on the right side of the screen and a little rectangle on the left side of the screen, and then this little dot that traveled back and forth, and you basically played ping pong. And if you ever played Pong, you've already had an avatar. Your avatar was very plain. It was a white rectangle. You could only move up or down on the side of the screen. You couldn't move from side to side. And the only thing that you were capable of actually doing was hitting this little dot back towards the person you were playing against, who also was being represented by the avatar on the other side of the screen. So if you've ever played Pong, you've already had an avatar. So we're already over one of the big hurdles, which is people are just thinking, avatar, what's this all about? Well, now they know, and then I move on and I show them a Pac-Man screen, and I'd say, oh, Pac-Man, big advantage now. Now you can move up and down, and you can move side to side, which means that you can work your way through a maze, and it feels like you're actually moving around this space in a much more meaningful way than you did with Pong. And then we just sort of talk about how video gaming technology has advanced over the years, and then I can show them some pictures, or actually bring them into Second Life and show them how the avatars work in there. And it's not such a big stretch of their imagination anymore, because they understand that, I've actually been an avatar, and maybe while I was sleeping, technology has gotten better, and the avatars are much more interesting, and they can do many more things. The virtual space is much more interesting, and you can do many more things as well.
The getting back to the question of progression, with the nonprofit groups that you've been consulting and dealing with over at TechSoup and Nonprofit Commons, have you seen a progression in terms of how they've been approaching the environment, like the level of sophistication, even if they don't necessarily have the dollars behind them like groups like yours have?
What I think that I've seen in talking to people is that there's a little more historical information out there in the interwebs to look at. So if you're new to this idea, and you even back 4.5 years or so when I first got involved, if you would, Google nonprofits in Second Life, you wouldn't see a whole lot of information. And now there's quite a bit more information available. And so there are examples of organizations. Certainly the Cancer Society's Relay for Life has been incredibly successful as a fundraising tool. And there's other organizations that have used, nonprofit organizations that have used Second Life and virtual world technology to do various kinds of training and awareness activities. So I think that people coming in today have that at their fingertips, perhaps in a much greater quantity than we may have had when we started out several years back. They haven't always done the research, so we still get a lot of people who come in, and again, they were introduced to Second Life in a way that wasn't necessarily relating to their persona as a nonprofit person in real life, and so they're pretty much as baffled as anybody ever was when they came in. But again, you have the ability to provide them with some pointers towards things that they can read on the internet or articles that they can download, and they can get brought up to speed a little bit faster than we probably were able to do a few years ago.
Right. I sort of hate to beat up on Linden Lab just because they have been innovative in terms of a lot of the things that they've done, but as well as everybody else, I mean, in terms of the challenges that they threw down in front of educators and nonprofits last year, right? And I'm wondering what a lot of the impact, through Rockcliffe, we've seen what the impact has been to educators, and where the education field has gone in terms of experimenting with OpenSim, and you look at Spot On, you look at Reaction Grid, you look at InWorlds, you look at Unity, you look at Open Wonderland. Have the nonprofit groups been doing a lot of the same thing?
Certainly the pricing change that Linden Lab put into place last year was a big shock to a lot of organizations, and I'll just harken back to what I said earlier about it's hard to find the dollars, and by gosh, if a couple years ago you convinced your CEO to get involved in this because the price was relatively low, bringing him the news that, or her the news that the price has just doubled probably wasn't a happy occasion. If you were already dealing with limited resources. And so I think that has certainly sparked a lot of people into looking at alternatives that might cost less. I think the biggest problem with the interrelationship between Linden Lab, the nonprofit organizations, educational institutions, and the like is that Linden Lab still seems to apparently not know exactly what they want Second Life to be, or what they want to do with it. And although I think the educational institutions that have been here, and those that are still here, and those that have left, and the nonprofit organizations have given them something that they have undervalued quite a bit, and that's really purposeful use of this as a meaningful tool, other than as just a place to go dancing or play Zynga or something. And until the day comes, I think when the Lindens really figure out what it is they want to do with Second Life, we're not going to know for sure whether it's going to be a favorable environment in the long run for nonprofits or a hostile one.
What do you see as being next for preferred family healthcare in terms of the next 3, 4, 5 years?
Well, one of the things that we've, as I said, we've continued to seek funding. So we've had a stream of funding sources that we've been able to locate over a period of time. We're working very hard with federal and state agencies in order to actually get the counseling services that we deliver to be put into the mainstream of funding, so that just like telepsychiatry was a real oddity 5 or 6 years ago, and now it's commonly paid for under public insurance plans and private insurance plans, we want to be working with all those funding sources to get them to pay for our virtual counseling in the same way as they would pay for any counseling services that were delivered in a real life setting. And so that's a big chore for us, but it's certainly something that we're really going to be continuously working on. We have started to offer our assistance to other organizations, focusing primarily on nonprofit counseling agencies as consultants, and we've signed some consulting contracts. So I've been doing a little bit of traveling just to go to some other cities and help people figure out what it is they can do with the virtual world and help them get set up in the virtual world space. And we see that as a role that we can play pretty far into the future as well. Beyond that, as I said, we're trying to envision new populations that we're not effectively working with, like military personnel, and even have been doing some research on video gaming and autism, with the idea in mind that we might be able to put together some virtual counseling project that would be effective with autistic children. And so we're going to continue to do that. Until my job title changes, I'll still be charged with figuring out what we should be doing next year and finding the means and the funding to do it.
Yeah, are there other technologies that you're looking at as well, in addition to 3D virtual ones? Or
yeah, we have through the course of some of the work that we've done, made the acquaintance of some people up at the University of Wisconsin that are doing some very interesting things, just using digital phones and different tools that you can use just on a digital handset in order to check in with clients, in order to offer them opportunities to connect with somebody when they find themselves in uncomfortable situations. And we're very interested in utilizing some of that technology. The handset or the smartphone is really where everything is headed, I think, and tablet computers show every sign of replacing a lot of people's real computers over the next few years. And so we're looking at technology that fits that well, and of course hoping that the virtual world technology can be adapted so that it's usable on a smartphone or on a tablet computer as well. And as that happens, we certainly want to be right in the mix there.
Yeah, well, that sort of leads into it almost answers the last question that I had for you, which was, if you had a crystal ball, what do you think the impacts of virtual worlds will be on society 5-10 years down the road from now?
It's interesting. I remember when I first started talking about this to public groups, and these were mostly counseling related groups, mostly substance abuse counseling related groups, I would always sort of start off as a disclaimer and by saying that what we're doing here is really designed to reach people who couldn't get treatment services otherwise, usually because of great distances between where they're physically located and where the counseling services are. So I'm not really saying here that this is going to replace counseling as we know it now. It's going to reach a population that can't be reached. But what we found is that actually our virtual counseling has on several parameters been quite a bit more effective than the real world counseling. And so I'm really coming off of my disclaimer these days and adding new groups of people, certainly people with physical handicaps. But the bottom line is that for many of us in the world, we prefer to do a lot of things online. We prefer to do a lot of things digitally, and we would rather do that. They're closing all the Borders books in my hometown of St. Louis, but Amazon's still going pretty strong, I think, selling a lot of books. And I think you have to look at those things. Does Netflix have a better model than Blockbuster and that sort of thing? So these days, I'm saying that I still don't believe that in the foreseeable future that virtual counseling is ever going to replace the traditional forms of counseling. But what I do think is that more and more people are going to find that they prefer to receive their counseling using a virtual world, and that we're planning to help deliver those services.
Very good. Well, Coughran, Coughran.
You have to say my name right. Coughran. I keep wanting to throw the GH in there. I don't know why. It's silent.
It's silent.
The GH is silent. And the U is silent.
The U is silent. You'd think after 4 years I'd get this right, wouldn't you?
Oh, we'd hope. That's okay, Fallon.
Oh my goodness. Anyway, listen, I want to thank you very much for coming onto the show today. It's been wonderful having you on here, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what you guys are going to be doing over the next couple of years.
Well, it was a great pleasure. You know, I always enjoy talking to you, Kevin.
Thanks. Well, for the sign-off, I mean, that's it from the Rockcliffe Rotunda, inside the Avatar Studios, produced by Bevan Whitfield and Rockcliffe University Consortium. Technical production by Robustus Hacks and Mel Burns in association with Metaverse TV. For more information on Inside the Avatar Studio, you can check out our website at urockcliffe.com, that's 2 F's, or subscribe to our Twitter or Facebook fan page, also at urockcliffe. So thank you all very much, and that's going to be it for the rest of the summer. We're going to pick up in September, and it looks like we're going to be starting off with Bevan. Who are we starting off with? Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! I don't believe his name's just slipped my mind. Buyer Sellers is going to be back for our first show, and you know, it's going to be really interesting because we're going to pick up some of the conversation in terms of what we had from last year. So, you know, it's don't worry, you're not missing much. August is sort of a month off for us, and we'll see everybody back here in September.